Afternoon. It is 2:33 on Thursday, November 13th. I am calling to order this joint session of the Portland City Council and the Multnomah County Commission. Commissioners, welcome. It's good to have you again. We always enjoy having you here. And to my colleagues who have shifted a bit today to make room for our guests, thank you very much. I think we're finally figuring out how to fit everybody around this dais. As you all remember, when the previous City Council and County Commission passed the Homelessness Response Intergovernmental Agreement in 2024, the agreement laid out regular meetings between the city and the county. This is our third such meeting this year, and each meeting has had a bit of a different focus. Today, we will be focusing on the report on what we have done in the past year, I believe, and the plan and KPIs moving forward for next year. Moving out of today's presentations, the updated action plan and the draft KPIs, which have been officially referred out by the Steering and Oversight Committee, will come before both of our governing bodies to be officially approved by our bodies as well. So today is the opportunity to ask questions together, plan together, make sure that we are on the same page here before we go and approve those documents separately within our own bodies. I will turn it over to the Commission Chair in just a moment for some introductory remarks, but just want to flag that after that, we will hear from Jillian Shoney on the Homelessness Response Action Plan. And then I believe, Ryan, you will be leading us through a conversation on the newly drafted key performance indicators, which we talked pretty extensively about during past joint meetings as we discussed what we might want those KPIs to look like. With that, Chair Vega-Peterson, please welcome.
Thank you so much, President Pirtle-Guinea. Good afternoon, commissioners and councilors. I'm grateful to be back here with all of you today for our third joint city-county work session of 2025 to talk about our joint response to addressing homelessness. So I just want to start out by thanking staff, thanking all of our providers who work on this. I'm really proud of the impact that we're making together. Together, we are housing and sheltering more of our neighbors than ever before in Multnomah County. On average, 1,000 people are exiting homelessness each month, thanks to our joint efforts. However, despite this impact, we know that homelessness continues to rise. Each month, 1,300 additional people are becoming homeless. The vast majority, nearly 1,000 of whom, are new to the by name list we now use to track people experiencing homelessness. What this means is that we have to figure out the right balance in our system to ensure that the outflow from homelessness is outpacing the inflow from homelessness into homelessness. Today, we will focus on a high-level review of the Homelessness Response Action Plan 2.0 action items and key performance indicators, which will provide guidance for future budget decisions and help us find that right balance between prevention, shelter, housing placement, and support services. In our October Homelessness Response System Steering and Oversight Committee meeting, we approved referring the action plan to our respective bodies, and on Monday, we agreed to refer the KPIs. These both happened after careful consideration and robust conversations. And I want to take another moment to express my gratitude to everyone who was involved in those meetings, including all of the staff. Moving HREP forward represents a significant and critical step for our partnership. We will not be able to reduce the inflow and mitigate people entering the homelessness system while increasing outflow without our combined leadership. We all have valuable perspectives to share, and our community is counting on us to continue working together to address the growing needs that we're seeing. In addition to the City of Portland, the City of Gresham, other system representatives such as Health Share of Oregon and Home Forward, as well as community members representing different perspectives, are at the table at the Steering and Oversight Committee to ensure there is geographic and cross-sector collaboration. I also want to appreciate the community engagement process involved in updating the Homeless Response Action Plan. The Homeless Response Systems team worked hard to engage the Implementation Committee, the Community Advisory Committee, and many others who have an interest in programmatic and systemic responses to homelessness. Importantly, people with lived experience also provided critical feedback. Thank you to Jillian, Ryan, and the whole HRS team for this important work. And now I'd like to pass it over to Jillian Shoney, who will present an update on the action plan.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Council President. For the record, my name is Jillian Shoney. I'm the Director of the Homelessness Response System. As you can see on the agenda, I'm going to be more brief to preserve most of the time for conversation generally and on the performance indicators part of our afternoon together. So I'll share just enough for members of the general public and the media to bring them along, and as always, happy to meet outside of this collective space. As the Council President said, by way of reminder, the Homelessness Response System, the action plan, and the current set of key performance indicators were developed during calendar year 2023 and adopted by the County Board and the Portland City Council during the summer of 2024. Immediately after passage, a team was put in place to set up the governance structure, our 3 governing bodies, and to begin work on the deliverables outlined in the action plan. So in an attempt to be clear out just right at the beginning about what this plan is and is not, the action plan represents all the systems and programs we should be looking at regardless of the level of homelessness in our community. Some of it represents big financial implications like the work we've done to expand permanent supportive housing, shelter, rapid rehousing initiatives, and other work represents really big systems level work such as creating ways to connect our housing and healthcare systems to improve the outcomes for those we serve, or big policy lifts such as changing city code to make it easier and cheaper to build housing. It is not an overarching investment strategy. That is primarily driven by our key performance indicators in your budget votes. And as you'll hear me say again later in this presentation, the process and approach we've recommended to the Steering and Oversight Committee on setting specific goals and that have now been referred to y'all empowers each and every one of you to help us to help set us up for success with the votes you will cast during the fiscal year 27 budget process. So back to the plan. With some solid work accomplished, it became very clear 1 year in that we were already due for a refresh. And with the nationally respected work of the data team at the county's Homeless Services Department, there was an opportunity to reorganize the action plan with how we talk about the homelessness response system and the big buckets of work. So in May, we set out to engage our invested partners internally and externally, and what you have today is that reorganized and updated plan. Next slide. So again, this is the first time it's received a refresh. It will not be the last. We have always planned that this document adapt and keep up with the work that needs to get done. The updated plan is a mix of existing items being carried forward, some with a bit of refinement to be more clear, and new action items that represent the additional work we need to tackle. Stated another way, it represents the continual quality improvement that is required by the current IGA. Truly, the collaboration over the last several months has been incredible. I really do think that we have some wonderful partners at the county, city, and metro doing the hard, necessary work in the face of the monumental task before us. And what this plan gives us is a guide keeping us on track, on task, and accountable to each other. Next slide. Some quick nuts and bolts. You'll recall that the original plan had 9 broad goal areas, and then there was an appendix with a mix of things. It was really hard for all of our partners to follow along. We've now reorganized it into 5 goal areas. 3 of those goal areas align with how we talk about the homelessness response system, simply inflow, those who are becoming homeless, safety on and off the streets, think of that as shelter, outreach, day centers, and outflow, those who leave our homelessness response system. The fourth, care coordination and cross-sector collaboration, deserving of its own section because it represents the big lifts in health, behavioral health, and of course its intersection with housing. And finally, the fifth, the never-ending, as it should be, need for data and evaluation, especially actionable data analysis, and how that allows us to always be in that state of continual improvement. To give you just a bit of flavor of those 5 areas, Goal Area 1, inflow, covers things like data analysis of eviction prevention efforts, especially in the context of the cuts by the state legislature this year, looking at case management across the county enterprise, preventing returns to homelessness from our jail. Goal Area 2, safety on and off the streets, largely about shelter, including shelter expansion and services provided, day center expansion and data collection, and the revised approach to county-funded street outreach to be in alignment with national best practices and collecting the data to demonstrate that quality improvement. And then, of course, the ongoing development of apps related to shelter availability and healthcare-based street outreach that just makes us more efficient at the work we're doing together. Goal number 3, outflow, think efforts to expand permanent supportive housing, evaluating our approach to landlord engagement, and the use of a one-stop shop for available affordable housing units, and then all of the city actions related to housing production. Goal Area 4, I'll go a little bit deep here, the care coordination and cross-sector collaboration. As mentioned, this is where we largely focus on our efforts building connections between housing and healthcare systems. This includes things like case conferencing and what I call Case Conferencing Light, which launches next week. Case conferencing is something that happens every 2 weeks where a large number of folks come together to talk specifically about an individual's housing and healthcare needs. The vision around Case Conferencing Light is starting with a partnership between Providence and a day center, along with HealthShare, Care Oregon, Chat, all at the table to be allowed to get some basic healthcare information to better help those on the streets. Like if they're involved in OHP would be a good example, and helping that person get in to see their doctor. Ultimately, the longer term vision for that space is to benefit outreach workers in particular, so that they have access to that information and can better help folks in real time. And finally, we are in the design phase of a pilot to improve the PSH retention rates for those in what we call our high acuity behavioral health cohort, which is connected to one of our new key performance indicators. And finally, Goal Area 5, which as stated is our data and evaluation section. The entire plan is quality well, let me pause for a second, sorry. I should say that the entire plan is quality improvement in action, but this section lists the very specific formal evaluations, data analyses that are underway or needed. Coming your way soon is a shelter performance and cost analysis that will be one of the informative pieces of work that you will learn about and use in our collective decision-making in the context of our fiscal year 27 budgets. Next slide. With that, I'll just point out a few things here in terms of our, we tried to make the plan just more readable. We added what you see under the orange number 4, a status column. So you knew the work that was underway and what we are planning for next. If it doesn't have anything behind it, it's just further down the road. We welcome opinions on that. And then of course, the responsible parties. It was just not possible to list every single person that we will be engaging with under each action item. So we focused on sort of the main convener or funder for that responsible party column, but again, not exhaustive. With that, I'm gonna pause here and take questions.
So colleagues, we've run into this before where my council colleagues can raise hands online, but I'm not sure that our commissioner colleagues can. So if folks want to just raise your hand in the old-fashioned way, if you have a question, we'll make sure to get everybody. Okay, no questions yet?
Oh, it's
Commissioner
perfect.
Singleton?
No, it's not.
Almost perfect. Thank you. I want to appreciate, one, it is a lot easier to read the plan, so just even that in itself is really helpful. And I've had a lot of opportunity to engage in this by sitting on the SOC, so I don't want to take a lot of time. I just want to say one thing I'd like to see as part of our research agenda is really looking at and analyzing our permanent supportive housing. I think you all have heard me say PSH is not alike everywhere, and us understanding what types of services are being provided in each type of program is going to help us better know how to match folks with specific programs. So that's just a missing piece that I would love for us to add. Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions or feedback? Okay, I'm sure there will be more as we keep going. Oh. Commissioner Moore.
Is it feedback on the whole thing or just that portion? I'm confused by what we're being asked.
I believe that the presentation on this piece of it is complete. Is that correct? Yeah. So we are going to move to a presentation and discussion on key performance indicators, but if you have questions or feedback on the action plan itself, now is your time. Commissioner Moyer.
Yeah, this won't surprise you. I'm looking at behavioral health. Yeah. I've got real concerns about this approach. One, I don't, again, understand why it's our interest in relationship to homeless services to want to increase secure residential facility beds. That's a state hospital issue. That's a PSRB issue. It could, under certain circumstances, be a civil commitment issue, but it is not an available resource for people experiencing homelessness who happen to have a mental illness. So I think it's entirely inappropriate to be in here. The second is I do support increase access to substance use disorder treatment, but I think the idea that OHA is responsible is equivalent to wishing on a star and not a particularly good strategy if we actually want to see this. And again, I think we need to focus this plan on what we can do, and we can increase access to substance use disorder treatment. I would really highly recommend, instead of a true 3.5 above inpatient treatment capacity, that we focus on a 3.1 IOP with housing approach, which we can do with our health share partner. And certainly I would love to see Multnomah County be named there as well. And then last but not least, I don't think we're dealing with our highest acuity individuals who need to have a higher level of service than supported housing can provide, of which there are Medicaid long-term care programs that they are entitled to, that the state of Oregon refuses to allow us to enroll in. But I would actually like to specifically call out that we have to work with the state to access both 1915I services, and for the most acute 1915K, that's really there. It's not here, and it's incredibly important that our state legislative partners and the health authority understand that there is not going to be a strategy that can support our highest acuity individuals long-term without accessing the Medicaid dollar, and they are directly being a barrier to us enrolling anybody in those services, even though they are legally entitled to them. And I really want to call that out, because I want us to be able to, in unity, show why that piece needs to be here to deal with this needed support services for our highest acuity individuals. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Do you want me to respond to that, Commissioner Moyer? I mean, so there is a whole mix of things that you just pointed out. But the whole, what we call your pilot, we call it internally, we call it the Moyer pilot. We have made that 4.2.3. That was an existing action item that we adapted. We refined to point to that work that we're doing with your office and the county COO's office. So that is in there. I will say the ones about STRF beds and SUD beds, those are carryovers. The reason why we left them in there is because they date back to the original plan where there was a joint effort between Health Share and the Multnomah County Behavioral Health Department on the needs analysis for additional beds. That was in preparation for the next pot of money that OHA was going to award. You know, the governor in her recommended budget said 90, the legislature passed 65 million. We just got information about the mix of beds that will be funded. I can get that information to you, but just by way of example, only 10 are STRF. So, right, it's not going to meet the need, but how we sort of document that and then sort of move that action item along is I mean, we can do that. We will document it in there and then sort of check that box and focus inward. I don't disagree with you. No one is coming to save us. So what are we going to do? What can we do at the local level with Metro to move this forward? You're not wrong. And I appreciate you.
Thank you. Councilor Ryan, did you have your hand up next?
I mean, I don't know if it was next, but hello, Jillian. I'm on the visual map page. Is that the right type of page to be on? Okay, I'm trying to avoid the KPIs. I have a challenge finding the word workforce in general, except at the very top. It says inflow. But when we don't have it anywhere where it says care, coordination, and cross-sector collaboration, what percentage of our providers are providing workforce as a part of their services, besides Central City Concern?
Ooh, well, the short answer is I don't know. The long answer is to first address the placement issue, because you're right, it could be in both inflow and outflow. So could housing production, right? And we just chose a spot based on sort of the majority opinion. We pulled together what we called a workforce table to inform the next set of action items. They're all new. All of the workforce ones are all new. That group of providers who it's a table that Work Systems helped us pull together. It was like 8 or 9 providers at that table, and we're going to continue to meet with them monthly from here on out. They prefer to refer themselves as employment programs, so that's why we made that change in response to them. But those folks do largely work upstream in more of the eviction prevention realm with some work in our shelters. If they were to be given more resources, they would double down on their efforts within shelter. But to be honest with you, most of their work is eviction prevention.
Okay.
That's why they're in inflow.
Nope, that makes sense, and I do think it's just missing visually here to name it. And overall, the comments are the number of chronic homeless who are now in the work. The largest number of single demographics of people on the streets, according to the data that I thought I saw one of the reports recently, was I think men aged 25 to 54. And so I keep thinking, and many of them are not disabled, but they do have a behavioral health disease, which was mentioned by Commissioner Moyer, and that she got me thinking about this. And then also, the best thing to do then would be to get them into treatment, sober living, and into the workforce. And so when I think of what's the best bang for the buck for those paying the SHS tax, it would be looking at that demographic and what impact can we do on action that would actually move people from dependence on government and on also drugs and alcohol to independence from both. And then we see this being good for the economy, being good obviously for their lives, and obviously much better for the conditions on the street. So I'm trying to find that through line in this, and I can't find it.
That's fair. I'm not sure I can articulate it in this moment because I know all of it pretty piecemeal, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, I think it's out there like this, scattered.
There's sort of the eviction prevention table. There's also a work group that Commissioner Jones-Dixon and Singleton have done around workforce that was more enterprise-wide at the county. We are going to present that report that is soon to be final to our workforce table on December 18th and do some bridging and aligning there and sort of see where we're at. We can also bring in, whether it's the city of Gresham or city of Portland, y'all also have workforce development programs, and not just in Prosper, but in IRP.
I think it's one of those where the city and the county can
Yes.
actually have a lot of impact together. And I know that with the shelter plan and many of the people that we're working with, they are into that category. Yesterday, when we had the long meeting, much of the indigestion I had with some of the amendments was putting a dent in that in the wrong way, because again, this is a pathway out of chronic homelessness. And so I just wanted to name that, and I was missing it as a specific goal, and I hope we can see that action plan come to life.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I have Commissioner Brim Edwards and then Counselor Green and then Counselor Dunphy. Commissioner, go right ahead.
There we go. Okay, so I had just an overarching question about, this is more the structure. There are many goals and strategies that are not, they don't have the designation of either underway or up next. There's just a, there's nothing in the status box. And I think it would be really helpful to understand sort of, is this a, next up, like in the next 3 months, or is this something at 2027, just so we can see the sequencing? Because as a, you know, as we go through our budgets and just our policy work, if you're thinking it's happening in 2028 and we're thinking it's happening in 2026,
that's
we're going to
fair.
be unhappy in 2026. So just having the, even like a proposed sequencing,
Yep.
that would be helpful. Then, this is sort of a broad question, but then I'm going to narrow it down to like, and give it a specific example. But for example, if we did all of the strategies that were listed, then what would be accomplished? It's like an if-then. Because the overall goals are like very lofty, and like we could do all of them and make just a little bit of difference, or maybe we can make a big difference. But it's not clear how much we're going to move the dial with each
Yeah.
of these. So it's kind of, again, if we did all these, or we did half of them, what would the outcome be? And specifically, I'm going to go to the housing production one, number 3. Increasing the number of available housing units at all levels of housing affordability. So that's general, but I'm afraid if we don't get more specificity about what exactly we need at all levels, that the pipeline is going to get clogged, either in shelter or people on the streets, because there's no place for them to go. So if we did all the things in number 3, would we have the housing that we need?
I'm going to let Josh, because I'm going to say one of those action items is like the next funding source. That has yet to be determined. Turns out we need money to build housing. So with Josh, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. I'm going to talk more about, well, in the next phase, I'm sorry, I'll introduce myself, Josh Roper, Policy and Planning Director with the Housing Bureau. I'm going to talk more about housing need, housing unit deficits, sort of a similar conversation to what happened in the SOC meeting at the last maybe 2 SOC meetings ago. But I will say, I think in general, our approach to determining housing need happens at a pretty high level. It gets broken out by maybe 0 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 80, maybe 80 plus. I'm going to mostly focus on 0 to 30 later, but even within that, the way that the typical LIHTC project works, you can be eligible from an income ceiling perspective for a unit, but not actually able to afford it, even though you're in that 0 to 30 band. So, long way of saying I agree that in the work, we need to break it out in more detail.
So I'm going to have a question when we get to the KPIs about the 0 to 30, because it's the only increment, but I'm really concerned about the level of rent assistance we have right now and the sustainability of it. So if we don't have all levels and we just have the 0 to 30, I'm concerned we're not going to get after that larger piece. And I guess my last piece of sort of feedback is I would want to know if we have a housing production strategy. I guess 3.3.1 is complete the initial plan for the city's unified housing strategy. I would hope we'd be adding an action item of like build an implementation plan. So we have a plan, but we like actually implement it that has that whole inventory of what exactly we need. So just feedback
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of
what would be
sense.
helpful.
So I feel like the city has one.
Well, yeah, we have a couple.
There's an existing needs analysis and production strategy on the books.
So it should be integrated into this, it seems.
What?
It seems like it should be integrated into this, then if there's something outside.
That was an action item we considered complete because we got it done in 2024. So I checked that one off the list. But yeah, I mean, this is where the unified housing strategy is our next one. A lot of that is the social housing work. So it is about implementation. That's why the TIF districts are on here. The TIF districts are part of the city's housing production strategy. Now they're implementing those. And so that was the new action item associated with that.
And just quickly, there are kind of two, in my mind at least, two buckets of work here. It's the housing needs analysis work to determine what do we actually need to house people in Portland, and then the housing production strategy, the unified housing strategy, other plans to actually produce that housing, just to make that distinction.
I would just say, I would like the goal to be, instead of just increasing the number of available housing units at all levels of housing, but like implement our housing production plan.
Okay. We can do that. Josh can do that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councilors, I will flag, I think the commissioners may know this, that Councilor Smith, who was not in the room when we were talking about workforce just a moment ago, does sit on the group that we were hearing about that I believe, is it Commissioner Jones-Dixon and Singleton oversee? So we do have city representation in that workforce project as well. I have Councilor Green and then Councilor Dunphy and Councilor Knoll. Go right ahead, Councilor Green.
Thank you, Madam President. Thanks for I like the document format. It is easy for me to read. I'm going to get kind of in the weeds, if you don't mind, under goal 1 on inflow. Inflows that, I take a sort of short-term and long-term lens of this problem. Mm-hmm. And long-term, of course, I echo the commissioner's sentiment that we should just implement our housing production strategy and just do what we can. We've got counselors today who brought forward a design review resolution, its first stage to pursue to that. But there's also this very short-term need. And I see a number of action plans in there that are addressing that housing stability. I'm curious if you can describe the difference between 1.1.2, which is convening of a work group, and then 1.1.4, which is articulating a system-wide strategy, because they seem to have some of the same themes. And I'd like to understand a little bit better how they sequence together, or like, does one depend upon the other being complete? Does my question make sense?
Well, they follow one another. Sort of step 1 is this eviction prevention table that actually became a thing out of the city-led housing strike force. So that's sort of, I would say, foundational, with the second one being the next step.
Okay, that's helpful. And I guess, I'm looking at the evicted in Oregon data dashboard, and over the last 12 month, the trailing 12-month period, there were 11,841 cases filed for eviction. On average, at least 90% of those are just for non-payment, difficulty in payment. So that's 10,656 people evicted. Maybe they end up on the streets, maybe they end up somewhere else, but that's our inflow problem to me. Yep. And so I'm wondering, do we really need to do more studies on this, or do we just need to kind of plow some dollars into eviction defense and keep those folks housed? I'm sure you guys have a better response than I do on that.
Well, dollars for eviction defense, but it must be paired with rent assistance, right? Because of the very thing you're pointing out. Yeah. Like, you can keep an eviction off somebody's record, but they got to pay that back rent and then keep
Sure, but you can get sort of renegotiations in the settlement. But I just wonder, and I know that there's a discussion on the balancing of the ratios, but I'm just curious where in this joint body, what we think is a priority. For me, it seems eviction defense and rent assistance is a huge priority, as a huge opportunity to prevent, like probably the least expensive way, frankly, to deal with someone who might a month later become homeless. So just wanted to raise that question up. And I guess I get anxious when I see what looks like a couple year-long pipeline of studies to then recommend probably we just need more money for rental assistance and eviction defense.
Is it helpful to get an answer from the commissioner who's overseeing that work group as well?
Yeah, totally.
Commissioner Singleton.
Thank you. Please rest assured, I do not subscribe to year-long studies. This will be like a couple of months of a work group of let's get some concrete actions. Some of it is to attend to the current issues that we have with the federal government and changes there to make sure that folks that are in mixed status families don't become homeless because of their changes at the federal level, as well as potentially HUD changing most of our permanent supportive housing vouchers into transitional housing and ensuring that those households, some who have been housed for 13 plus years, don't lose housing and become homeless. And so there's a bit of we've got a crisis moment to attend to and then that bigger picture, but please know it will be a couple months max.
And I welcome anybody jumping in. Sorry, a lot of you are involved.
Feel pretty
in very
confident with that answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor Dunphy.
Thank you. I have a number of things. Some of them are going to be phrased like questions, and other ones will be me just sort of stating things that I have observed. I just want to note, I think there's too many cooks in the kitchen on who is responsible. On one of these action items, there's 11 people who are 11 different groups that are responsible. 1.1.3, I think that's right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And generally, I have found that if everybody is responsible for an outcome, then nobody is responsible for it, and there's no one to actually hold responsible for that. And there's a number of these specific action items where a responsible party is not at the table that I am aware of, at the very, for example, and sometimes they're only listed once. The library, for example, enormously important partner, but they are only responsible, as near as I can tell, for 2.2.3. But I don't know that they have an ongoing lead, and by being responsible, how do we hold them to that as an outcome? Well, there. Well, also, ultimately, I mean, to that point, then, isn't the responsible party then, in that circumstance, the county board? Right? And who is responsible for making sure that those followed through? And, you know, if you have a county liaison role, then it seems like adherence to this broad plan should be sort of labeled. I think we need to have a body that is responsible for a outcome and be able to go back to them. And so we can't just say, well, 1.1.3 never passed. Well, yeah, because only 10 of the 11 parties responded. I also think that there is a difference here between responsible parties who are governmental bodies versus elected bodies versus community partners. Like, for example, all of the workforce development responsibilities are sort of broadly just outsourced to work systems. Work systems does great work, and we can hold them accountable in their contract and all of that, but it seems a bit like we are outsourcing some of that responsibility, and I worry about that. Additionally, we under the housing, well, that's a complete sentence. I also worry about some of the specifics in here under housing production goals. For example, I'm not totally clear why 3.3.4 is there, allowing for self-certification and third-party review for city permit approvals. That is a great policy and one that I am super supportive of. I'm also supportive of single staircase expansion of housing, and so that we can work on the state level and understand, you know, how we can get more housing built. I'm interested in SROs. I'm interested in reuse of existing buildings and how that helps towards the total capacity of our housing production. But to call out one policy as being a tool towards housing affordability, I'm not perfectly, honestly, I'm not totally clear how self-certification ultimately gets us to affordability. It gets us to process improvements. It gets us to potentially time saving, which is cost saving from a development standpoint, but there's 1,000 things that we are actively working on that aren't listed in here towards the housing production strategy that, it just seems odd to have that called out in particular. I think also having these housing strategies, I mean, self-certification should not be a goal in and of itself, but rather how that informs the broader systems that we are talking about. If the goal is get housing built at the same rate in Portland as it is in Gresham, as it is in Troutdale, then that's a good goal. And to say we want X many days or X many months or X many dollars to be a standard, but simply passing a policy doesn't seem inherently like it's strategic. Additionally, it feels like a lot of the affordability in here really relies on rent subsidies as a permanent focus for affordability rather than finding other ways broadly towards housing affordability. I mean, like, obviously there are things about housing production strategy, about expanding the partnerships with our CDCs and social housing and things like that. But we very clearly rely on a market that is never going to be responsive to who it's serving and subsidizing those landlords at a significant cost, as Commissioner Brim Edwards was saying. The biggest one for me, though, is that this is still this is a really thoughtful roadmap through an enormously complex system. But there's not, as near as I can tell, a clear responsibility for somebody to make the system less complicated. And I think that if a goal of this is scaling, in fact, I think specifically it was quoted in here as saying that we need to invest in solutions at a scale sufficient to meet the need, but complex systems like this can't scale at the size that we need. And so there's not necessarily somebody or a body or a collective responsible for identifying the complexities of the system and simplifying them, whether that is navigation for an individual from an overnight shelter into more permanent housing, into services, things like that, or standardization for outcomes across our two bodies where we are contracting. We can ask for a lot of this information from our contractors who are running our shelters, as long as we are asking for it in the same way and we can use that data to inform those goals. Things like daily bed counts and availability, things like affordable housing availability, like we've all acknowledged that there are a number, I mean, there was almost 1,700 available vacant permanently affordable housing units in the city at one point. I think the mayor's making good progress on that, but how we identify that in a systemic way. And lastly, I will say that I don't think any goal is really valuable unless it is time-bound and measurable. And I know we're getting towards those KPIs. I think that we need to be able to, if we're going to set ourselves a goal, it can't be open-ended. It has to be specific and measurable and tangible and in service of a broader goal. There's a lot of really good work that is going on in here, but I think we still have some areas where we can tighten that will help us towards our broader goals. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll note that that's coming from the Vice Chair of our Homelessness and Housing Committee. So as you're talking about the need for different housing goals in here, I think what that may mean is that there's a need for some real-time updates as we make changes at the city around what some of our housing goals are and the way that we're meeting those goals with some of what's in the plan throughout the year.
And I look forward to working with you all on any policy solutions that the city of Portland might need to do it, or any leadership opportunities in the community that I can help play to make any of those realities. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
I have Councillor Canal, and then after that, we're going to move to the conversation about KPIs. Councillor, go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I agree with everyone who's mentioned that it is much more readable. I appreciate that. I have the misfortune of following Councillor Green and Councillor Dunphy on this, who said a lot of things, so I'll try to not be duplicative. And part of this is that there are some things that are maybe the scope is a little bit challenging. So if I'm asking about something that's a little bit beyond that, I think the door's been open because of some of what's included in here. And this is kind of building off of Councilor Dunphy's question. My first question, though, is why is housing production under outflow and not under inflow? Affordability requires available supply. The absence of affordability creates more homelessness.
Yeah, it's similar to workforce or employment programs. It probably belongs in both places, but just for simplicity purposes, it landed where it was landed. But to be totally true with you, I agree with you. I really wanted it in inflow. I lost that fight. The collective agreement of all of our invested partners really wanted it in outflow for now, so that's where it landed. It was just like, where do we, it's both, but we put it in outflow. That's the honest truth.
Okay, thank you for that. And on that, within that section, I am happy to see scattered across this document that we need to see completion of several council-approved items here, like the social housing plan. There's, Councilor Dunphy mentioned something else. And by the way, some of these do include things that are just determining whether an option exists, not necessarily choosing to pursue that option in order to achieve the goal. And so on that subject, I would love to see the long-term vacant property fee study included here too, because that's how we ensure our supply is available in the first place. My concern around the big picture is I don't see the use of the word rent here in an absolute sense, except as it relates to assistance, or in one case, low-income renter households. In other words, we're not tracking the number of rent-burdened households, or the number of extremely rent-burdened households, or the ratio of average rent to median income, or the growth rate of rent relative to the growth rate of wages. And all of that is, I think, part of what you may be hearing through some of the other threads of questioning here, is that it's very focused on the system and less on how do we ensure that people are not falling into it in the first place. Mm-hmm. I think that relates to whether or not supply is a part of inflow, and the expansion of supply, I should say. I want to follow up on Councilor Green's point about 1.1.4 and 1.1.2, which is where eviction prevention lives, or seems to live to me in those two places, but I do not think it is strong enough because all we're talking about is budget and investments. There's nothing in here about legislation or policy to make it harder to evict folks in need. For example, kids or teachers during the school year, or eviction during extreme weather events, which are particularly harmful types of evictions that put people in a position where those initial periods of time are the hardest. No eviction is going to be easy on the person evicted, of course, but this is a particular purpose that I'm concerned about. And then the last thing, which is a question, is about 3.3.6. Which is the social housing plan. Can you tell me about the timeline for that? Why it's, and specifically whether or not the recent change in PHB leadership has impacted your vision for the timeline of that?
I will answer what I know, and that is that and Councilor Avalos, not to put you on the spot, my understanding is that a table is coming together in December for the unified housing strategy. I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Councilor Goer.
What?
Unified housing or social housing? Those are two different things.
I thought social housing was embedded under unified.
Sure, but there were two resolutions or two studies or whatever. So,
Councilor, why don't you speak to the outcome timeline for both of those? Because I know there have been a couple of changes and it's probably good to update everybody.
Yeah, so as it relates to the unified housing strategy, well, first, let me just say thank you. And I think what I like about what I see in here is just the way that you're integrating the city and county. But I do have some questions about making sure that we understand whose jurisdiction is what. I think you asked that question or made that comment of some of these items that have long lists of people responsible. And I see in some of those items that it would be good for us to have clarity on who's on point, especially as it relates to the city on housing production and all that. So I'll just name that. But I think that as it relates to unified housing strategy, the timeline has shifted a little bit, but I would say that they're still on track to do the collection of all of the, essentially putting all of the research, all of the studies they've done in the past, the housing needs analysis, right? Just making sure that we have everything that we have done in one place. So that should still be on time as far as getting all of that in one place. I would say that the broader there's two parts to unified housing strategy. There's the collection of all of those things, but then it's the actual vision creation and the strategy part. And so that's gonna kind of happen in the months in the new year. So the December deadline that was passed in the resolution is for that first phase. And that seems to still be on track. Am I incorrect on that, Josh? We're still good on that one, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so that hasn't shifted. Social housing also seems to be on track. That was already designed to be coming back to us in May. It is meant to be a part of unified housing strategy because of course it's one of those strategies. And the goal, those are two kind of different groups of people that are working on that because they have different goals. But ultimately the goal will be that in the spring, they'll all kind of come together, hopefully, with the unified housing strategy coming together with the social housing strategy study that's due in May. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think my question is that all makes sense.
Okay.
It's a little bit different from my question, which is whether or not losing the expertise of a social housing champion at PHB is going to make it more difficult to execute the strategy or actually to develop it in the first place. I know it'll impact the execution. And I am concerned about that. And if that's not a question anyone here can answer, then I will consider it rhetorical. But that is a concern that I have as to whether or not it is, we all know it's going to affect the execution, but whether it will also impact the development of the strategy in the first place.
Counselor, I think that's perhaps something just to flag for the folks at the county as a concern, and then we can have additional conversations either in the committee or offline with the mayor about how we ensure that that doesn't come to be.
Thank you.
We are going to move now to the key performance indicators portion of our conversation today. We will hear a presentation and then have time for discussion following the presentation. Ryan, I believe you're leading this portion of the meeting?
That's correct.
Go right ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Council President, Chair, Mayor, Councilors, and Commissioners. My name is Ryan Dybert. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Deputy Director at the Homelessness Response System. I'm here with my colleagues from the Homeless Services Department and with the Portland Housing Bureau to talk a little bit about the key performance indicators that our Steering and Oversight Committee has recently unanimously forwarded to you all for consideration for adoption in those future meetings. So today is an opportunity to get grounded in those key performance indicators as they are proposed and to answer questions that you might have. So first, just to note that the original Homelessness Response Action Plan came with 4 key performance indicators. You're familiar with them. We've presented on our progress toward the goals associated with those at each of these quarterly convenings. But just to refresh, looking at sheltering or housing an additional 2,700 unsheltered individuals, reducing unsheltered homelessness among priority populations, increasing exits from shelter to permanent housing, and then also ensuring that people who are assisted in permanent supportive housing are able to successfully retain that. So we've been tracking on those 4 measures for some time now. As we've talked about those in these sessions, those 4 key performance indicators are effective at illuminating some components of our system, but certainly not the breadth of that. And the way each of those is structured, the goals in particular, have some challenges associated with them. So we've talked through some of those challenges. Knowing that we were in the midst of reorganizing the HRAP for this second round, it also presented then a good opportunity to dig deep on trying to identify a better suite of key performance indicators that could help guide our collective work. We leaned into that work with our oversight committees, our Steering and Oversight Committee, our Community Advisory Committee, and Implementation Committee. But a lot of the legwork happened with our colleagues at the Homeless Services Department, who are able to help look at national best practices and how to measure system performance for homeless services systems. And we're happy to bring forward a set of recommendations for you all today. Just as a reminder, when we talk about key performance indicators, we're really talking about the overall needle. Are we moving the needle? It helps us understand what is happening within our systems, not always, though, why that's happening or how that's happening. So I want to just be clear that as we talk about key performance indicators, each of those comes with a whole set of sub-indicators that helps us understand if the needle's moving in a particular direction, why is it moving, and how might we intervene to move it in other directions. And then also just to note that all of those sub-indicators also roll into, as some of the counselors have talked about, our system-level contracts to deliver those services. So program metrics within those contracts. Another way of looking at it here is that those key performance indicators roll all the way down to that contract performance level and help you monitor the work that we're doing collectively across the system. But importantly, to get changes at the top of that scale in those overall key performance indicators, that's where it really connects to the policy and budget decisions that you as our elected bodies help to make. So in our process of KPI development, we worked with a set of selection criteria throughout that process. We wanted to make sure that it was measurable, that we actually collected data that would help us analyze that on a regular basis. We wanted it strategically aligned with the new structure of the plan, so having metrics that looked specifically at inflow, outflow, safety on and off the streets, and we wanted to make sure that the KPIs were reflective of the system, our systems as a whole. So in other words, it's not measuring the performance of a single county department, but rather all of our departments that are working together, as well as our city bureaus and our colleagues who sit outside of local government, whether it's workforce or the healthcare system. So we wanted to make sure they were looking at the breadth of that full system. There are 12 proposed KPIs, and there is a lot of detail that we've shared to you all, both in individual briefings for most of you at this point, and in the handouts for today's meeting. You have this whole KPI definitions and recommendations document, which goes in detail through each of the 12 key performance indicators, how we're proposing to measure them, and how we're proposing to set goals associated with any of those. But just to try to remove that layer of complexity and just try to put into plain language what those 12 key performance indicators should be offering you is a set of measures by which you can understand, most importantly, are we reducing the total number of people experiencing homelessness, both sheltered and unsheltered? And more specifically, are we doing that by more quickly and effectively getting people into housing? Are we helping to create more deeply affordable housing that better meets that scale of need that we see across our community? And are we better stabilizing folks with significant health needs so that they can successfully access and maintain their housing long term? And I think most importantly, we're trying to give you a set of metrics that you can understand at the system level. Are we supporting the work at the scale and over a long enough time frame that we make the difference that we actually want to see compared to the actual need that's going on in the community? So if you took that whole suite of those 12 KPIs, they should help you as policymakers answer these questions. I won't go through all 12 of those indicators in any detail. We will take a deep dive on 3 of them, though, just to try to illustrate the approach for measuring and setting goals around those. Specifically, we're going to look at the first key performance indicator, the total number of people experiencing homelessness. We'll dive a little bit deeper also on the percentage of those folks who are unsheltered. That's our key performance indicator number 8. And then my colleague from the Portland Housing Bureau is going to talk a little bit about the affordable housing production metric, which is metric number 3. So a reminder that we have those 3 overarching indicators, as well as then the 9 additional indicators that are tracking either an inflow, safety on and off the streets, or outflow. So if we're going to talk about a goal setting approach relative to any of these key performance measures, it's important to understand where we're starting, to think about where we might want to go collectively in our goal setting. And so just to help with setting some of our current baseline, the chair alluded to this in her opening remarks. We have just surpassed in this last quarter that ended at the end of September of 2025, we've just surpassed our original goal within the Homelessness Response Action Plan to shelter or house 18,658 people by the end of this calendar year. We've exceeded that goal by about 7%. There are now more than nearly 20,000, just shy of 20,000 people who we've helped to shelter or house over the last 2 years. Sorry, over the last 7 quarters. We still have 1 quarter yet to go. So we'll continue to exceed this, I think, by a pretty good margin. Similarly, these are data that are displayed on the Homeless Services Department dashboard, reflective of all of our combined efforts, city-funded and county-funded. Particularly the top line in green, looking at the total number of people that we're sustaining in housing through supports from our system, and the bottom line in black, which represents the total number of people who are newly housed in each month, so moving from homelessness into housing. And generally there, what you can take away is on average, we're newly housing around 300 people per month. And on average, and right now we're sustaining more than 8,500 people in housing who've been previously housed through our support. So you take the last slide and this slide, and we can confidently say we are sheltering or housing more people than we ever have as a system. And yet, as the chair described, again, this is from our Homeless Services Department dashboard, tracking inflow to our by name list of people experiencing homelessness, that top line in green, compared to outflow in any given month, that bottom line in yellow. And what you see there is for the last 18 months, there's only been a single month in which outflow from homelessness has outpaced inflow to homelessness. On average, that's about 1,400 people per month coming into homelessness, roughly 1,000 of whom we have never seen in our systems before, and about 1,100 people moving out of homelessness each month. So that results in a net increase of about 200 people per month that are adding to our by name list of people experiencing homelessness across the county. Again, this looks at that monthly data from the Homeless Services Dashboard website. Over the past 18 months, all the way through August, where we have a little more than 16,000 people who are experiencing homelessness as of August. About half of those at this point are unsheltered. So that's the context from which we're looking at trying to help make some estimates around overall levels of effort to understand how you would start to take this curve that has about a 1% to 2% monthly increase in the total number of people experiencing homelessness and shift it to a curve where we're seeing monthly decreases in the number of people experiencing homelessness. So whole slide of caveats, I won't read through them other than to say, really in this work, we are just trying to provide you the broadest of estimates. I say often, we're trying to get you into the neighborhood, not even into the ballpark. So this is trying to get you a broad brush sense of the levels of effort that it might take to get to different outcomes. As we head into the budget season with each of the bodies, we're going to be working on some slightly more refined modeling where we can actually say, if we increase investments in prevention, what does that do to some of these numbers? If we increase investments in permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing, what does that do to the numbers? So we'll continue to try to dial this in as we go, but for right now, this is just the broadest level of estimated effort.
And Ryan, if I may, I just want to pause there for a minute because that was a lot. So any questions around current state and how key performance indicators are the investment strategy tied to your budget votes? Just those sort of main 2 pieces. Any just questions there?
Councillor Dunphy.
Yeah, well, broadly, as a key performance indicator, we're not seeing the performance based out of the dollars. We have raw numbers of saying, it is great that we had a goal of 18,000 people either shelter or housed. I would sure like to see those disaggregated because I suspect it's lopsided, but also what are we getting for the dollars we're spending? If we are throwing good money after bad, we don't right now have a way, at least through what I'm seeing and what I've seen, to be able to differentiate the act of counting, this many people came through the door, versus we put this many dollars in and we got this result, and where we can get better improvements out of those dollars. Because ultimately, this is a budget question. Like we have plenty of smarts in this city to be able to actually know how to solve this. We have amazing experienced people, but we cannot just keep ballooning the cost. And so we need to be really centering cost as a result of housing. I mean, it is wonderful to house 200 people per month on this slide, but if the house we gave a year ago was half the price of the housing we're giving today, what are we doing to adjust for that? So I think we really need to make, and I mean, to that same question, I guess, as you said, we're getting in the neighborhood, not the ballpark yet. But do we feel like we have the right systems for data collection that we need in order to actually move these numbers? Are we getting from our service providers more than just a head count on the tally, or on the list, but are we getting or are we able to get into a granular level to understand the person who fell on hard times and lost a paycheck or had an injury and it just needs a little help versus a person who is suffering from decades of poorly treated mental illness? Are we able to differentiate that from our list, and do these systems inform that right now?
Good afternoon, I'm Lori Kelly. I am the Homeless Services Department Planning and Evaluation Manager. I can speak a little to our data. So the answer is we're getting there is the best way to put it. So we actually collect more than just names and clicks through the system already. We always have. We have a bunch of information that can tell us if somebody's chronically homeless, if they are hitting the system for the first time. But I'll be totally honest and say that our homeless system data, our HMIS system lacks it's not state of the art, we'll put it that way. But we are aware of that, and that's why we're currently in the process of procuring a new system that's gonna allow providers to interact with the system better. If providers can interact with the system better, we're gonna get better data on that information. So that's a work in progress. In the meanwhile, we've done some amazing work in the background to create some backup data systems that allow us to analyze per dollar how we're spending, so we can do things on a contractual level to understand stability per dollar, and then also to begin to get at things where we can understand, with collaboration with HealthShare and some other groups, things like the high acuity behavioral health information. So we were able to take our data, give it to them, have them do some analysis, and really understand with more texture who the people are who are experiencing homelessness. So I think there's a lot more there than there was in recent times, and it's getting us towards strategies.
That's great.
And I think, and just to say that in this context today, and in the context of decisions that are coming forward about the key performance indicators, I would say, I think that's a several full layers deeper into thinking about how we make system improvements and how we improve our contracting. When I say things like we're trying to get into the neighborhood, at least for this purpose and talking about are these effective key performance indicators for thinking about the system as a whole, we want to give you just a very broad sense of when I'll say things like a 50% increase in effort. Some of that can come through greater efficiency within our existing systems. Some of that can come through more investment from within the city and county or from partners beyond it. So there's a lot of detail that's not built into a statement like 50% increase, for instance.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know that nuance matters, and I know that it's virtually impossible to dive into that level of detail with this current setting. And I'm glad that you all have a good grasp of it. I worry that by having 12 KPIs, that might just, I mean, I know that you were, we couldn't go through them today because we don't have the time, and each of them requires some complexity. But if our ultimate goals are too complex to be able to quickly explain, then I'm not sure that they are strategic enough or narrow enough to, informed by each other in a way that actually gets us moving towards the goals, rather than having it's wonderful to know how many eviction judgments we have. How does that help us ultimately? And that's a rhetorical question. I mean, like, how are these informing each other? How are they focusing our efforts and narrowing it? I had one other thing and it left my brain. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jillian, you opened this up, and I know there's a lot of presentation left, so I'm going to remind folks that we will have a broader discussion at the end, but if there are questions about the immediate information we just got and how we should be processing that as we hear the rest of it, I want to make sure we get to you. I have Councillor Green next.
I'm actually going to wait to the broader discussion at the end.
Okay, Councillor Novick.
Same.
Councillor Canal.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. It's, I think, 2 slides before this one that's currently on screen. If the purpose of the indicators is to be able to indicate, to give a trend line over time, I'm unclear on how the sustaining housing, tracking that over time, if that goes down, is it because we got people into a place where they did not need support? Or is it because our funding was cut and we didn't end up being able to support as many people? And I think if there is not disaggregation of the data on that, it will be very difficult for us to assess that particular thing. And I just wanted to know am I missing something on that?
Well, a few things. First, I don't believe that people sustained is actually a KPI that we're recommending. No. But that being said, it is something that we have to track when we start to think about where we're spending our money, and it goes hand in hand with another metric that we track, which is positive exit stars, housing stability. So people who end their rapid rehousing subsidy, for example, are they exiting to homelessness, or are they staying housed? People in PSH, are they staying housed? So some of these metrics work in unison with other metrics to understand how we're doing, but they also just illustrate the kind of investments at hand.
Okay, thank you. And I think it's then just about the presentation of it versus the actual things. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Wilson, did you have a question for this time?
I did, and this is the slide I'd like to talk about, so let's stay on there. And Commissioner Singleton, if I could ask you to kind of weigh in on this as well, and or Lori, Ryan, or Jillian. So it's the 8539 number in sustaining housing. So there are a host of different reasons that could be altered or changed. Workforce development and having somebody become sustained. And you're right, rapid rehousing is generally on the high side 2 years, but the goal is to always help somebody through case management, become independent and permanently housed. And I've always looked at it as thirds. A third are, in some cases, always going to need permanent subsidies, so some PSH or whatever the case. A third are working through their process, whatever the need may be. And a third are ready to exit for whatever reason. How do you determine through casework that if somebody could be moved into permanent housing, independent living within 4 months, but stays 8 or 12 or 16, that's that input-output where you're trying to change an outcome. Can you tactically tell us what does it take through case management to help somebody through that faster, so it's lower cost and more meaningful for all of us? We have $120 million that we were talking about yesterday that we're using for rent assistance. That's a lot of money that if we could have work harder and smarter, it'd be better. How does that work?
I think a couple of things. One, that dollar amount is from 24, and we know we've seen significant reductions. I think it was almost 70% reduction in eviction prevention from the state this year. So it's a pretty significantly less money. And I will say most folks that are placed with rapid rehousing dollars are either in a position to pay the rent or they're still on wait list for affordable housing. And so while they're receiving a subsidy, it's waiting for them to get into that next step. That's where I want us to push a little bit more on workforce. I think it's something we need to bring our business community into, is we have to focus on opportunities for people to move into living wage jobs. When we end their homelessness, we don't end their poverty. And that's where a lot of people stay stuck and then become a part of cycling in and out of that system. So I think if we actually did targeted workforce investment opportunities for people that we're already paying subsidies for, then we could really see a difference on the back end and them not needing that ongoing rent assistance.
And that's kind of my point. I agree. So having the system work smarter and faster and better with the money that we have, there's just opportunity there. And so, Councillor, you saw that same sort of opportunity. So thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioner Moyer.
Yeah, I'm a little bit struggling to see how these KPIs crosswalk with this plan, in the sense that we've broken up this plan into 5 key areas. even within some of these areas, I wish there was greater delineation by subpopulation, because I think one of my concerns about these KPIs is success looks different depending on the individual. And one size should not fit all. And how we invest and the reasons to invest in certain ways change by the circumstances of an individual. I think a lot of us would say, man, if we could prevent people from being evicted and having to move, particularly if they have school-age children, because we understand how that, upheaval of a family has such significant issues that we would like to prevent, where, somebody who may have a significant disability, the goal is not necessarily that they will be fully self-sufficient and employed, but rather, are we finding the right level of supports mixed with housing so that they are long-term successful? And I might define success as, we have reduced these other costs associated with people with a behavioral health crisis who are unhoused. We provide the right levels of support. We see a reduction in things like hospitalizations, jail, whatever. But my concern with HRAP 2.0 versus the KPIs is it lacks any of that granular, and it's very global. And I sometimes worry that drives us to policies and investments that, again, are like, what's going to cast the biggest net, but not actually effectively address some subpopulations whose needs are unique, or there's evidence-based approaches that are very specific. I'm very, I happen to want to see a short-term investment in housing through outpatient or intensive outpatient substance use disorder into recovery housing that could look like a 6 to 9 month program, which is different than in here. And so I kind of want to understand why you went for more global numbers on the KPIs, and yet have, break out into 5 categories with some kind of specific targets on the plan. Like, why don't they crosswalk more?
Yeah, I think just generally what I would say there is that's the kind of work that will happen in those sub-indicator development phase, because these are intended to be very broad measures that look at a system as a whole, helping us get into to what degree is that needle moving for which populations is a lot of the work that'll happen in that sub-indicator process, and that can point us more to those programmatic interventions. So we're trying to give you just the highest sense I think of it a little bit, it's a bad metaphor, but it's like, think of the gauges on the car. You're only seeing 3 or 4 gauges to know, do you have the basic performance down? And then below that, you need to understand more technical work. So that's what I would say.
Commissioner Burnett-Edwards.
A quick question on the sub-indicators. One of the things that concerned me, just having been here from the very beginning, at least to the conversation about the Homelessness Response Action Plan, is my understanding that what the 2 governing bodies are being asked to approve are just the I don't know what you call them, but the recommendation, which is the very high level, not necessarily the goal or maybe the sub-indicators. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I'm going to speak to that after Ryan is done. That exact question you're asking.
Okay, should I hold my comment?
Please, if you don't mind.
I'm happy to do that.
Okay, we're going to get you back to the rest of the presentation now.
That was my fault, Council President. Sorry, I was reading the room.
So let me, again, knowing that we have limited time, and want to preserve time for conversation, I want to just illustrate, maybe with a couple of these KPIs, some of the complexity that we're working with around trying to set goals, and to be able to help you make good decisions around those. So we did some estimation work, again, neighborhood, not even ballpark, estimate levels of estimation to try to understand if you were going to shift the needle for the key performance indicator number 1, that total population of people experiencing homelessness. What's that actually going to look like in the current context? So in this graph, what you see is our actual data from the by name list. You saw that on a prior slide, but this is carried over into this slide, everything unshaded to your left. The red shaded area in the middle just assumes that through the close of this fiscal year, you're seeing that same level of growth in the overall population, about 1% to 2% per month. And that with new levels of effort that we would look to deploy in fiscal year 27 and 28, we're trying to estimate what would it actually take to get that to bend downward by about 1% per month. So I think that of this as the stem the tide scenario, get so that we're just bending that curve in the right general direction. So with these estimates, what we're able to show is that from the peak at the end of that red shaded area, by the end of 2 additional years of extra effort, you'd be at about a 20% decrease. But you'll note as you draw that line across from the end of the green shaded area back to today, that gets you roughly even with where we are today. Just to get to that point, given the level of inflow that we have currently, it would take about a 50% increase in that overall level of effort. And again, Councillor Dunphy, to your points, there's a broad range of ways you could look at 50% increase in effort. But generally, it would require that we move from a system that is able to serve about 25,000 people a year to over a 2-year period, to a system that could serve about 38,000 people in a 2-year period. So that's that 50% increase effort. We also modeled out a set of more aggressive assumptions. So instead of 1% month-to-month decreases in the number, it's more like 5%. And again, same scenario leading up to this, but to get that level of a decrease, you'd get about a 70% reduction in the overall population of people experiencing homelessness. It'd get you down to the 5,000 folks experiencing homelessness in a given month, kind of a range, and that's where you have a shelter bed currently available for everyone every night. And that takes almost a doubling of our current levels of effort. And again, so this is a thing we can do with math. In the fiscal environment that we're facing right now, this very likely does not comport with our fiscal reality. We have in the past doubled the level of effort across our systems, but it's always been with significant influx of resource, particularly when SHS came online as a revenue source for this work. So I want to caution you that while this is possible as a theoretical exercise in the current fiscal environment, I don't think this scenario is a realistic one to project forward. So as we talk about these estimations and think about goal-setting work coming into budget discussions in the next fiscal year, we'll continue to be at the table with you and help you think about how different levels of investment in different types of interventions can help to shift numbers like these. So I wanted to illustrate that for you. There are several others that we that this same set of calculations carries through on. I'm not going to describe them for the purpose of time today. Happy to follow up with any of you on any of them, but I do want to spend just a little bit of time to hand it over to my colleague at the Housing Bureau to talk about some of the housing production key performance indicator, and I'll turn it over to you, Josh.
Thank you. So I'm going to walk through, I think, 5 slides about KPI number 3. So that's the KPI that's focused on the inventory of affordable rental homes for extremely low-income households, and it's set up as, a number per 100 extremely low-income households, so a number of units per 100 folks. In the definitions document that's part of the meeting materials, it goes into a little more detail about what the KPI is exactly. So it says the number of rental units that are affordable to renter households earning no more than 30% of the area median income, which is a category referred to by HUD as extremely low income. Affordable in this case means that rent and utilities combined don't exceed 30% of the 30% AMI income ceiling. And I'll show some examples on the next slide to sort of take that out of the abstract a little bit. On the slide that you're looking at right now, you'll see a little bit of information about renter households in Portland and incomes. So you'll see that this data is a little bit on the older side. It's CHAS data, which is Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy data from HUD. It hasn't been updated yet for 2022, so we're looking at 2017 to 2021. I'll say toward the end a little bit about how we're going to work on updating the numbers that we're working with. So this is really to get a framework across and how PHB, how the Housing Bureau is approaching this KPI and thinking about it, but we'll need to update the estimate. So on this, again, on this slide, you'll see total, sorry. No problem. Total renter households, 130,000 approximately. And you'll see a breakdown by category of income, so extremely low income, very low income, moderate or high income. The moderate or high income is above 80%, and the others are broken out. We'll see on the next page how those work. Next slide. So this is just to try to, again, take it a little bit out of the abstract and look at some examples of folks within each of these categories. So in the 0 to 30% AMI category, you can see this family with a single income of $25,000. They hit at the AMI level of 26%. An affordable rent is $625. And again, that's, they can afford this without getting into the cost burden territory. Cost burden being, you're not spending more than 30% of your income on rent and utilities. Severely cost burden gets you to 50%. You're not spending, you are severely cost burdened if you're spending more than 50%. Very low income, you can see a preschool teacher making $37,800 into the 39% AMI level. So in that 31 to 50% AMI band, and then you'll see low income, 51% to 80% AMI. Some examples there. Can go to the next slide. So like I said, we're trying to figure out with this KPI, how many units of rental housing are there per 100 extremely low income households. So another way to kind of think about this is to look for the unit deficit. So we can see that 30,690 households, we get that by taking the slice of the pie chart we were looking at earlier, the 24%, and applying it to the overall renter households in Portland. So that's the number of ELI or extremely low income households, renter households in Portland. Then we know from this CHAS data how many units are affordable at that 0 to 30% AMI level in the existing housing inventory. And that's not limited to the regulated or restricted affordable housing inventory. It's market and restricted, unrestricted and restricted. So if you just look at this and you say, okay, we want to get to a place where we have one unit per household, you would need another nearly 19,000 units to get there that are affordable to that AMI level. You can go to the next slide. So we'll keep working with this older data, this CHAS data, and this is the formula that gets us to the KPI. So we're looking to divide affordable housing units by extremely low income households. So that's the 11,740 number divided by 30,690 multiplied by 100. Again, using that CHAS data, it gets us to 38.25 affordable rental housing units per 100 extremely low income renter households in Portland. And not surprisingly, our goal is going to be to increase that number, but we need to figure out how much we can increase it by, how much is realistic to expect. And we also need to update the number itself. So on the next slide, I say a little bit about getting to an updated estimate so that we can work on the benchmarking phase of this. So we're going to work on an analysis using that CHAS data, but also what's called PUMS data, which is this micro data that's available for certain geographies to establish a more current inventory estimate, and that will function as sort of the foundation for discussions around setting benchmarks, which is, those discussions are planned for next year when the kind of budget floor is more clear and we understand things a little bit better. So we'll have the inventory sooner, later this year, and then next year we can go into the benchmark setting process. One last note I wanted to make is just that the way that this KPI is structured, it incorporates income, so it's a population measure separate from this housing inventory measure. So we should keep an eye on the fact that broader economic conditions and interventions will influence this KPI. So it is largely a housing inventory story, but not exclusively when it comes to KPI 3. I think that's it.
Oh, okay. So let's just jump, Commissioner Brim Edwards, to your question. So this is what the SOC recommended, and what is before you today, and for consideration for your vote in December. So pivoting off of what Josh just said, what the SOC has done is approved what you see highlighted in yellow in your KPI definitions document. Essentially, that is the what. What do we all agree that we are measuring and reporting out on a quarterly basis that represents the entire system, so we can see what's at play at the highest level, right? Because the financial floor is shifting underneath all of our feet in a variety of ways, what the SOC has agreed to is to sort of allow the dust to settle on our actual spending for this fiscal year, state monies, the county rebalance that just happened, y'all's rebalance that just happened, our December revenue forecasts come in, and then we learn, for example, about potential federal cuts that are going to happen, and then use all of this as we go into the fiscal year budget process. And after all that is said and done, we will just have, you all will have more information to actually set responsible goals. So we'll bring, after the budget process is over, we'll bring the SOC back together in July of 2026 and ask them to address what you see in green in the document. So that is the recommendation. That is what we are actually asking you to adopt in December. So everybody will have this document in hand, this what we call the definitions document in hand, as we walk into the fiscal year 27 budget process to guide those votes. Okay.
Next item.
Do you want to jump back in with your question here? Yes.
Is it appropriate time?
Well, as soon as we're done with the presentation, we're going to move to broader questions. So I think, Jillian, if you're okay taking the commissioner's question now, and then we'll have you finish up and we'll get to the rest of the questions.
Okay.
And she knows what's coming, so, but I just want to state for just the room, I'm concerned that the green goal, which is, I mean, the other ones are so high level, that the more specific goals are not going to be set by the governing bodies. So, and this is a governance issue that I raised, where you have essentially two individuals from each governing body and other people who aren't elected officials making decisions versus having these goals, which I think are the more substantive ones. I mean, the other ones are, I think, so high level that, like, we could, make a very small change and declare victory. So I'm just flagging that I have a big concern about turning over that authority and something that we'll all be held accountable for to a smaller subset of elected officials who may or may not be representative, and this is nothing to the people who are appointed, but there's a much broader set of elected officials, and I'm concerned that we're just being asked to do approve the very high level indicators.
I hear that, and I'm looking to our staff also, because I think there's a balance that the staff have to do in taking in the feedback that they hear when we're in this room and when you're in your chamber and we're here without commissioners, and incorporating that with what they hear from that group that brings in community and others as well. But I think it's a good note that that balance has to be right.
Well, I wanted to raise it in the room with the other electeds because I've shared it with staff already, but I'm not comfortable sort of having that authority go to, because we, for example, the county commission, we don't, as a commission, select who the individuals are. I don't know how the city does it, but it's, I think they're appointed by the mayor, but I'm not comfortable.
That's correct. I think that's probably a good point of conversation as we start to think about the future of the IGA and what the oversight work looks like. I think it's probably a deeper topic than we can get into in the next 25 minutes today. But Chair, as we set agendas in the future, that may be a topic that we want to make sure to make room for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just respond to this. I mean, this is something that we have talked about in context of the changes that are currently being contemplated at the Metro SHS conversation, as well as how do you reflect in any body where you're trying to like focus on work, the broader insights and perspectives and goals and desires of a much larger audience. And so where we've tried to really hold both in this process and that one is that, you know, as much as possible, having things come back to the respective elected bodies for voting, for approval, for engagement, for public discourse. And I think that like this is part of what we're doing today around these. I think the other piece is like our budgets are going to be so key for achieving any of this that we've been talking about today or any of the things that we're talking about in our respective chambers. And so the marrying together of this work and what's here in paper with our actual like votes around the budget is going to be really key and really powerful. And, you know, there's a commitment that I know we have to continue to come back to, you know, to the council and to the commission around how things are going, are we achieving these things? Because we know ultimately, like, each of us is elected by the voters and we need to be accountable to them ultimately.
I think those are all important pieces. And the other piece that I think is important, especially for the council body that's up here, because we are sometimes a little bit more distant from pieces of this work, is making sure that we're hearing directly from staff regularly. And I know for a while there were updates to the committee and making sure that that's something that we have periodically at the chair's discretion so that we can continue to have that feedback loop as well, I think is an important piece of it. Jillian, do you want to continue through the presentation?
Yeah, I'll just jump to next steps. Next slide, please. So here we are today, November 13th at the joint work session. Additional briefings for elected officials or your staff between now and December. We welcome those requests. We do have some time carved out on the county calendar on November 18th for some additional time for questions on all of the above. And then we'll be at the county board for a vote on December 4th, 2 separate resolutions, Portland City Council, December 11th. The reason for those 2 resolutions is because one of the resolutions will essentially amend Exhibit 1 of the IGA. That is the what we are measuring as our KPIs. And then the other resolution replaces the original plan that was an addendum to the IGA, the action plan. Next slide. And then just looking ahead, where we go from here. So as Ryan said, our current set of KPIs expire at the end of this calendar year, but we will have a final report on those KPIs due in February of 2026. That is when we'll officially shift to the new KPIs, bring you a baseline quarterly report in May of 2026. Then fast forward to the end of the budget decision, the budget process, will bring the SOC back and they will set the specific goals in July of 2026. And in that same month, the clock starts ticking. But I do not want you to skip over how empowered you will be during the fiscal year 27 budget process to set these KPIs up for success right out of the gate. This is the investment strategy. So what we will ask of you, and we will stay in touch with you as as things are being debated in a budget context, how they will influence these KPIs. We can be in constant communication on that so that the fiscal year 27 budget process is essentially what creates the foundation for the SOC and that goal setting in July. That's it. I'm done. All yours.
Thank you. And there are already some folks who were in the queue earlier and are putting their names in electronically, and I see some hands from commissioners. I'm going to start with folks who haven't spoken yet, who are on the list, and then we'll move to people who have asked additional questions. Councillor Novick, go right ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, we heard from Ryan about what level of effort gets us to what. And I just wanted to share some hen scratch, calculations I was doing based on information I thought I had about a couple of different options. Ryan, you and I were talking last week. You said that for every 10 people you give rent assistance to, you can estimate that you prevent one case of homelessness, because we do not, there's, as we just heard, there's many, many, many people who are severely rent burdened, and you can't predict exactly who will fall into homelessness. According to your numbers, the average inflow, sort of net inflow, is about 200 people per month. Although I have to say, you say average inflow 1,400 a month, average outflow 1,100 per month, so that looks more like 300, but let's just say it's 200. So what a certain high-ranking county employee told me yesterday that the average rent assistance is $1,800 a month. So I was just doing a calculation of if you're have 200 more people a month means 2,400 a year, and 1,800 a month times 12 months times 10, I get, if you invested $518 million a year in rent assistance, then you could hold the current homeless population steady. Does that sound about right?
I'm not really good at doing math in my head, especially when I can't see it. I'll be honest about that. So I'd be happy to work through some of those scenarios, but also these are exactly the kinds of scenarios that we want to be able to discuss with council and the board in the upcoming budget cycle, to think about if you're wanting to put money into this type of intervention, what might it cost, and what would you expect to see relative to those KPIs if you make that level of investment? And we can, I think, bring that to you in a pretty dynamic way to consider a range of policy options and investments. So I apologize for not being able to track fully on that. Yeah.
I'll email you like end scratches. Similar question for Josh, actually. You said that we need about 11,000 units for people at the 0 to 30 MFI group. Is that right?
We didn't identify a specific benchmark. There was a deficit of about 19,000 if you were trying to get, and this is, again, it's using older data from the point that 38% of the need being met to 100% of the quote unquote need being met, like 1 unit per household. So yeah, 19,000.
19,000, okay. That messes up my math. For some reason, I thought I saw something that said 11,000. Well,
that's the inventory right now.
Okay.
In 2021.
Well, my impression is that it cost about $450,000 per unit to build a new unit. So the number I got when I was trying to figure out 11,000 was about $5 billion to build enough units. So you'd multiply that by, if it's 18,000, then 90,000, maybe it's $9 billion. So if we had $9 billion to build, and I think that's some of the exaggeration, because when you're building affordable housing, it's not all local money. There's federal money, tax credit money involved, et cetera. But is it fair to say that if we had, through various sources, $9 billion, then we could house the people at 0 to 30, and that would make a pretty significant dent in homelessness?
It's complicated. You're right. Our typical line about our local subsidy is in the 150,000 neighborhood, even if the total per unit cost is 450 or more. But that isn't something that we could just kind of turn on like a faucet, right? Because that's a typical LIHTC project, and there are only so many LIHTC projects you can actually do. I will say there's a connection here to the social housing study work that's happening, because we're calling it social housing in this kind of umbrella way, but one piece of it is really about alternative financing strategies, for example, a cost-based rental model or a limited profit model, where you can potentially have a lower subsidy and get longer term, over time, more affordability, right? So there are different angles. That won't get us to 0 to 30 on day one, but in terms of long-term vision combined with maybe a reallocation of our LIHTC projects to focus more on lower AMI rents, that might be a strategy that comes out of that study.
I just want to say, to me, this is the kind of discussion that's meaningful, and frankly, talking about key performance indicators, they're useful, but my instinct is, okay, if you do just rent assistance, can we stabilize the population with an extra 580 million? Is that right? If you just build housing, does it only take a third of 9 million, so a mere 3 billion, to build housing for all the people below 30% median family income? And if those numbers happen to be true, off the top of my head, it seems to me that building new housing is a better bang for your buck than rent assistance. So, those are the kind of analyses and trade-offs that I would like to see as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And colleagues, I'll note that we have about 6 more people signed up to comment and 14 more minutes. Councillor Koyama-Lane.
This is my first time speaking.
It is, so I think you get to take a little bit extra time.
Thank you for being here. I look forward to these joint sessions. I have a couple of quick thoughts. First, I want to boost Commissioner Singleton's earlier comment where she was starting to talk about the need for investment and action in the root causes of homelessness. And my other quick comment is looking at these inflow numbers. They're really staggering, and I think they underscore for me how important eviction prevention is. I overall really appreciate the data and action focus, and we know that there are significant racial disparities hidden within data. So I'm wondering about disaggregating data by race and ethnicity, how we're making sure that every data point, KPI, action item factors that in to make sure we have effective, culturally specific responses.
That's one of the first areas of disaggregation that happens in those sub-indicators. So for each of these, when we talk about are we moving the needle and for whom, there's a range of by population, but particularly looking at that from the racial equity perspective. Yeah.
And a lot of that is on our dashboard right now. You can tinker around with.
I'm also wondering about older adults, because in the original June 2024 Homelessness Response Action Plan, it noted that 1 in 3 people experiencing chronic homelessness in 2020 were 55 or older. Individuals 65 older were the fastest growing age group of people experiencing homelessness. Without intervention, by 2030, those numbers were triple. And I didn't see a mention of this population in what I saw today. Can someone speak to this?
Yeah, relative to the KPIs generally, again, that's another one of those population metrics that we can break out sub-indicators around. So understanding where that's falling across different age ranges and thinking about both the scale of intervention that might be needed and to Commissioner Moyer's point, where there might be different types of interventions that may be needed. Yeah.
Is there a reason why it's not in this HRAP or this specifically called out?
Within the 2.0 version?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it's not, but I'm happy to take a look. I apologize. I trust your read on that, and I'm happy to get back to you on that.
Okay.
But just by way of example, some of what we do when we're looking at targeting populations, that is in the implementation of the work. For example, when we started case conferencing, we started with just PSH, but it was PSH for older adults. So it was that targeted population that we started with first. It's now expanded to something much more broad because we have the capacity to do more. But it's in the implementation where you will see some of that targeted population focus.
Anything further, Councillor?
No, that's it.
Okay. Commissioner Singleton.
Thank you. I think I say it every time we're together that we're moving towards what I think we've needed is understanding the cost and the outcome data for our shared investments. I also think it's really critical that we get to a space to have a conversation about what our roles and responsibilities are. I think we're doing two different activities. I see the city's role as public space management, the county's role as homeless services, and then there's intersections on the inflow side around housing production, as well as our eviction prevention work, which, so folks who may not be aware, does not actually happen primarily in the Homeless Services Department. It happens in the Department of County Human Services. And so I say that to say, I feel like we're getting there, but I'd really like to see one of these conversations be about what are our roles and responsibilities, and we spend time on what the coordination between those two systems are. And I do want to just appreciate Councilors Avalos, Zimmerman, and Green for some conversations we've had together to start to unpack that. I don't think we're there, but it's been a helpful conversation for me. And then I will say, you don't have to answer these because I know we're running up on time. But Josh, in your section of the presentation, the slide with the people with no faces, I'm unclear. It seems like they're all either singles or couples, so I'm unclear where families fit into this. I also want to shout out, thank you for illustrating that affordable housing is workforce housing. That is one of my crusades that I am on, so I appreciate you showing that in here. And then additionally, kind of related to that is I don't feel like we're talking enough about the unit mix at 0 to 30. We have a lot of families experiencing homelessness that don't have enough income for these vacancies at the 60% AMI. But we're not building a lot of family size units at 0 to 30, and the pipeline looks really terrifying when you look at, since the housing bonds have been expended. So I'll stop there.
There was one family, but we'll draw the attention to it more next time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councilor Green.
Yeah, I really appreciate the discussion on the KPIs. I think on KPI number 1, the way that I interpret that is that's what you get if you take as given your delivery model as a function of dollars and available resources and say, this is what we can do if we have these many more dollars. I think that's clearly not sustainable in any kind of fiscally responsible sense to get the numbers down that we want. And so we actually probably need to take it's a helpful indicator because it highlights that, but we need to take a constrained optimization approach. Commissioner Singleton, we had that discussion and you showed these different sheltering models with different rates of efficacy. And so, you know, you hire an economist or something like that, and they could say, well, given a fixed budget constraint, here's how you would optimize your service delivery. And so that's something I would think that we should be approaching. So we can do, I also do the hen scratch math too, but that's a little bit more than that. I will say, if we're doing math on the back of our envelopes, part of the reason why we're, I think, going to get less and less bang for our buck when it comes to rent support and or eviction defense and that sort of thing is because we're price takers in the market for housing. We don't set the price. We don't have any control over that. We're just at the mercy of people who would lease out. And so our subsidy will probably go up over time because rents go up over time, right? And so if you had $100 million in one-time money, at the average cost that the Portland Housing Bureau has been purchasing houses off the market, you can get about 1,000 units. Maybe not quite that much because there's a scale problem. Like, how do you spend $100 million in a short amount of time? But assuming about $100,000 a door, that's 1,000 units. And if you charged $1,800 a month for an apartment, which is about the median, so there's a sliding scale based upon your ability to pay, then you could earn $21 million per year in revenue for the owning entity for that. And then, of course, you might need to subsidize that over time because there's costs associated with that. But that gets your price maker proposition in play. Now the public sector has cost control. And then with that kind of revenue, you could support $300 million in bond issuances with our current policy. So I introduced this, colleagues, just to say that when I see a KPI like that and I think about the dollars that we're going to need to support where I want to go, which is a very low homelessness rate, right? We're going to have to think differently. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Canal.
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, first I'll just co-sign everything Councilor Green just said. I wanted to pick up on a thread that Commissioner Singleton mentioned in the past and that Councilor Koyama-Lane mentioned here. In KPI 3, you do say, you've noted that you need to track it by unit type. So there is some disaggregation noted in advance here, but there isn't any on the different demographic groups. And this relates to something I'm going to mention in a minute that Commissioner Brim-Edwards said as well, which is the level of detail that we're being asked to approve here. I need to see that written down. And I think we'd be going backwards on some of the issues that Commissioner Singleton raised a couple of these meetings ago around ensuring that we're taking care of the most vulnerable populations if we outsource that decision-making on the sub-indicators that way. And to that point, and to more specifically reference what Commissioner Brim-Edwards said, I think the green is something that elected officials should be weighing in on, not just something that all elected officials, I should be saying. The idea that we're being asked to sign off on reduce net homelessness over 2 years, but not being asked to weigh in on by how much is a concern to me. And I understand that the budget will have a part of that. I appreciate that point, but I don't think it's enough. And I think we would be drawing the line between what is legislative and what is administrative too close to the legislative side of that spectrum, which is a problem. I don't know if you're facing it at the county side as much, but it's definitely a problem we're facing here at the city. And one that I want to take this opportunity to talk about, as well as every other opportunity. We need to be saying that there's detail that the elected officials of the city need to weigh in on. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dunphy.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I'm sorry. First, the
No
slide.
one who starts, I'll be quick, is ever quick.
I know. I know. The slide that you guys showed me a couple weeks ago, or however it was, and you just showed now, that if we have a 50% increase in effort, we can decrease it by 20%. But that functionally means that we project that it'll take over a year for us to get back to the level of homelessness we have now. And I don't think the public really is aware of that if we keep doing things, we have already made enormous sacrifices in our budgets on both sides of the river. And if we don't do more, it'll continue to get worse. And if we double our efforts, there will still be a third as many people on the streets in 3 years' time. That's horrifying to me. This has literally been keeping me up at night. I agree with my colleagues, the concerns about the approving the yellow before we know what the green is. I would not be comfortable at this point voting for a resolution where we're approving the outlines but don't have the numbers there, and I understand all the reasons why, but I won't be supportive of unless that green is filled in. And lastly, there are 5 HRAP goals with 16 total sub-goals, but 12 KPIs. And if these documents were if these 2 documents were sitting in the big pile of papers that I have on my desk and it got knocked off, I'm not sure that my staff would be able to know that they were the same presentation. They don't feel like they are informing each other. And I think that there are good measurable goals, but as Councillor Canal said, yeah, we want to measure how many people are no longer homeless. That's not hard for us to understand, but I don't understand how the KPIs are informed by the HRAP, and I think that more work needs to be done there to more clearly align the goals we are setting and how we are measuring the work along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We are about to move to final words from our chair and the mayor. Does anybody else want to weigh in on anything else first? Okay. Madam Chair, please go right ahead.
Thank you, Council President. I just want to start off again by thanking staff at both the county and the city to getting us to this point. I think this was a really helpful chance to really share this publicly, but also to get some feedback and response on these things. And so I just appreciate all of that. There's also been consistent and persistent feedback and commitment and engagement from our subcommittees who are working on these, our community and system partners and leaders from department and bureau. So I just really want to give them a shout out. I want to say something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is that we may never, ever again have the amount of money we've had flowing into the system around homeless services as we did in 2022 and 2023. And yet we are seeing year after year that the need continues to grow. And as it grows increasingly expensive to live in the city of Portland and Multnomah County. And I think we all realize that because of the changes we're seeing, because of this authoritarian federal administration, that the growth in need could be immense. So what I've heard today, and which I'm glad to have heard, is a strong shared desire to figure out how we make this system work most effectively and efficiently with the resources that we have. And that's been important to me. That is why we are using the data that we now have, as well as the collective expertise in our community, to figure out which investments produce the strongest, most permanent impacts for people experiencing homelessness, and being able to move them into permanent housing and have them stay there. So I look forward to the continued conversation and partnerships among our respective governing bodies. I mean, again, I will just reiterate this. This collaboration is what our community wants to see and needs to see, and this is how we're going to be able to navigate this issue and these decisions we have to make about our budgets together. As was mentioned before, the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners will continue this discussion in a board work session on Tuesday, November 18th, and then they will be brought forward for a vote to our board in December. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Mayor?
I have 8 minutes of comments that I'll move to 4 minutes. Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Commission colleagues, and good afternoon, councilors. As I've told my staff, we have many challenges in Portland, but only one crisis, and we're here to really discuss that crisis. This past 10 months, Sky and Brandy, their teams, and I have been focused on adding 1,500 shelters to Portland to care for Portlanders. We have 1,090 that are opened or scheduled to open, and we are on time, on task, and on budget to meet that goal by December 1st, no matter how much stress Sky is going through. Some of the wins that we're having right now is we've used our Loved One reunification, which is a housing first best practice, and we've now housed 150 people in over 40 states throughout the United States. We talk about housing here often, and every person we house in another community with their family member saves $300,000 in our community, and we've saved $45 million in that program. We've begun sheltering those that are suffering on the street. And the last week, we sheltered 39 people in our shelters. And currently, we have hundreds that are there. So just doing some math. In the last several months, we've housed 150 people through reunification. 520 people are sleeping in our new shelters tonight. We sheltered last week 39 people from the street into shelter. Those 3 things alone have lowered unsheltered homelessness by about 10%. So Portland is taking action. And this discussion's very important because it discusses the collaboration of our 2 jurisdictions that is so important for us to move forward. I'm proud of the early results of these programs, but that said, I'm not satisfied. Portlanders have demanded that we stay focused, we work together, and we deliver results. And let me be blunt, our current outcomes are poor. As a result, people continue to suffer and die on our streets in rates we've never seen before in Portland. And now we're preparing to vote for a Homeless Response Action Plan 2.0. And I'm in favor of these improvements in transparency and action. We've talked a lot about that. But I'm also urging action. While we sit here talk the most power that this state has seen convened together, we're still talking about KPIs and goals while people suffer and unsheltered homelessness and homelessness climbs. Our intergovernmental agreement, homeless response system, and homeless response action plan all call for continuous improvement. Continuous improvement doesn't mean reading off the same metrics every meeting. It is a business discipline devoted to removing bottlenecks. We have so many bottlenecks right now. In 2017, the average length of stay in our emergency shelter system was 23 days. Today, it's 77 days. That's a bottleneck. In 2017, our emergency shelter system had only a few people staying over a year in it. Today, we have hundreds. That's a bottleneck. And bottlenecks have consequences. In 2017, we had 2,000 people living unsheltered. Today, it's north of 7,000. I'm just about finished. At the same time, we've gone from spending $40 million annually to over $400 million. I'm now asking for additional changes to the HRS Steering and Oversight Committee. I want changes to reporting and a focus on continuous improvement. Jillian and I have spoken often about it, and that's what we're moving for, and I'm thrilled with that. KPIs are good, but we must stay focused on action and outcomes. We can set goals, but if we don't change our processes, our systems will continue to fail. Those failures will be measured in lost lives on our streets. No single jurisdiction, not the city, not the county, not Metro, not the state, can do this alone. We have to be focused together. We must focus on ending unsheltered homelessness and address the suffering and dying in our community. Then, when we accomplish that, which we are working every day tirelessly to do, we must, and with the same relentless focus, move every effort and resource to end homelessness in our community. So thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, there are a lot of different ideas around the table for how we get there. And I will just say personally, I would rather all of us work together on my second or third choice approach than run in the opposite direction on my own. I think it's critical that we take advantage of this space that we've set for ourselves with the IGA to make sure that we are actually spending our resources on meeting the same goals, because if we don't, we are spending our resources working against each other. I have heard some of my colleagues say that they're concerned that we don't have the final say over what it is we're trying to accomplish, and I agree that there are some challenges that that brings up, but I also want to point out that we have the final say in our budgeting. And I think it is really critical that as we spend the next few months thinking about what our budgets look like next year, because we're already in budget planning for next year, that we're focused on how we use our budgets to meet shared goals, and that we are meeting those shared goals in a way, to my county commissioner's point, that allows us to work within the roles where we are most suited to get the best results. We have to make progress on this. And when I look at this report and these KPIs, I am frustrated, not with our staff, but because it is still reports and KPIs. And I know that there are a lot of people on the ground doing a lot of work, but the line keeps climbing. And to the chair's point, we're not getting more money. No one's coming to save us. So we need to be focused together on how we can get there. And it's why I think these meetings are so important. Today was mostly listening to reports, because we needed to hear each other's concerns so that we can reflect that as we vote on these separately next month. But as we continue to come together, I hope that we can dig into how we really optimize this system as much as possible, and how we make sure that with both our city and county staff sitting before us, we're giving direction to take on the roles that we each can and do the work in a way that helps us actually make progress here. I'll note that there have been a lot of conversations lately at the city around investment in behavioral health broadly, not in taking on that work ourselves, but in how we can make sure that we're moving the needle there, because we know that we have to address the upstream barriers to stem that tide into homelessness. There's been a lot of conversation about how we do more permanent fixes on the housing side in a better way, and how we make sure that those units are right-sized and that we have enough family-size housing. I hope that the plan continues to reflect all of those things. I was glad to see the emphasis in item 4, goal 4, around some of the behavioral health pieces. I appreciate everyone being here today and the conversation, and we'll make sure to continue to have these conversations. And as I think you all heard feedback today about what we need to see as we take these votes next month, I hope that we can have those be smooth and easy votes with the assurances that we need reflected in what we see before us next month. Colleagues, we will have more of these meetings in the coming year. I believe this is our last one for this year. So as I close us out, I just want to say thank you for all the work that we've done together this year. And I look forward to continuing to refine these plans as we move into our next budget cycles. With that, we are adjourned.
Tight, was that? Did you time it? Well, it could have been much worse. I abridged it. Nice to see you, Mike. How you doing? Let's go.